Welcome to the QnA Tech School. I am your host, Jonathan Kyle Hobson, and today we're broadcasting a little bit early at 2:30. Today's class is going to be on, this is the future of entertainment, but this is going to be on the history of the camera. You can watch live every Thursday at 11 a.m. and Friday at 3 p.m. Thursdays are usually a lot bigger and usually lessons. Friday I just do a little bit of a short episode, a little discussion, about 30 minutes long. So this episode will be very short. You can find us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, so please follow us, submit questions, and so forth. So here we go along the questions, and we're going to go to the topic, and here we are. So I am not on that camera. Why am I not there? Darn it. Okay, but anyway, we're going to keep going. So today's camera is on the evolution of the camera. And we're going to discuss the ancient history of the camera. We're going to discuss the 1800s and the 1900s. We're going to briefly go over the timeline of the camera. I'm not going to really go into too much of the video camera. I'm going to mostly stay on the photography of the camera. But we're gonna start discussing that, and we're gonna start introducing into kind of how the camera evolved, where it started, and where it's going. So the camera we actually have written history that the camera was invented 3 times throughout time, and it could have been invented more than that, but we have records that it was invented 3 times. So the most people agree that the first time it was invented was by the Chinese, in ancient China. Roughly 470 BCE, that's before Christ, before Common Era. We have records of the Chinese inventing the camera obscura. The camera obscura is a very primitive version of the camera. It's also known as the pinhole camera. Basically, you just put a tiny little hole, a really small hole, and you have a dark room on the other side, and the light comes through that hole, and it gets reflected backwards on the other side. The camera obscura in the 1500s and in Greek times and in Arabia were used a lot for drawing. The Chinese actually used this camera obscura as a form of theater. They'd have people play out a theater on one side, and people could watch it in an audience in this dark room. And so they really took a projector's approach to the camera obscura. They were in the front of the first movie theaters really to ever happen in time. And so that kind of got washed away in history, though. We kind of lost the camera obscura, and it reappeared for many years. Even the Chinese lost their own history on the camera obscura. So the camera obscura kind of got lost by the Chinese and lost by the world for a very long time until it was reinvented by a physicist, Arabian physicist, and I'm not really sure how to pronounce his name, but I think it's Irem Al-Atham. I'll put like links below where I got my information from, so you guys can double check me on this. But he wrote several books on light and on optics of the camera, and he was an explorer. He was a traveler, so he traveled a lot and collected information from all around the area. Everywhere he could go, he traveled and collected information. And he created the camera obscura, or invented a camera obscura, and he traveled around with it. It was a big hut, and he would set this hut up, and he would go in there and he would draw and trace the images and create traces. And he would also use it as tourist attractions, and he would show people this. And he was very interested in knowledge. His goal was to collect as much knowledge as possible. And I think this is the golden age of that area, and they really collected a lot of knowledge. And this was like the area of math. Math was being invented around here, and this was in the 11th century, around the 11th century. And then again, the ancient Greeks invented the camera obscura. Now online, there's a lot of people mention the ancient Greeks before the Chinese or before Arabia, but in fact the ancient Greeks invented it pretty early, around 1000 CE, Common Era, or AD, and so they invented the camera obscura, and they invented it really for drawing. So they drew with it a lot, and they really went into optics and lights, and there was philosophers and Greek philosophers that really explained how that worked and really got into detail with that. But it wasn't till the 1800s where we really start seeing a camera that we recognize. And here we're going to go to this next scene over here. And here we start seeing the camera Obscura in the 1800s, and this slide is going to repeat. So it's going to go over and over again as I talk. But in the 1800s, we really start seeing the progression of the camera. And instead of hundreds of years passing before something gets reintroduced or reinvented, we start seeing this rapid progression of the camera. And the first camera to develop uses an array of chemicals to really make that camera. And we start seeing the Dragoner types, which are called the Dragoner types, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, and the Calano types. And these very basic cameras are very primitive cameras, and they were invented. And Louis Dragoner unrevealed his camera in 1939. It was the first practical camera that shot photography and kept that photo, and recorded the image on its own without having someone needing to draw it. And this is now the most expensive camera out there. You can go and buy this camera, and it's really expensive to buy. But yeah, it was the first kind of really, effective practical camera to be invented. And it used a variety of chemicals, and I'm not going to get too complicated into the process of how those chemicals work. I'm not really familiar myself on how they're working, but they're light-sensitive chemicals basically. And when the light hits them, they're interpreting that light and they're creating an image. And so the basic cameras use that, and the film basically is the same kind of thing, but it's a more advanced version of these early cameras. And then we go on to 1857 where the dry plates were invented. Dry plates cameras were a lot more practical, and in 1871 Richard Leach Maddox perfected the dry plate process. He really sped the process up and made it a lot easier. And dry plates were the first pictures that made it possible to take a practical photo without a tripod. If you were in bright daylight, you could take a photo without a tripod with a dry plate, with a dry plate camera. And so dry plate cameras made it a lot practical, and they were basically the first in kind of an evolution step towards film. They were these hard plates, and the light would go onto that plate covered in light-sensitive chemicals, and it would create the image. And then we go on to George Eastman, I think is how you say his name, Eastman. And he really pioneered. He's actually the creator of the Kodiak camera. So Kodiak today thanks themselves to George. He's the creator of that company. And he pioneered the first mass-marketed camera. And this was in 1888 where he started marketing that camera. And it sold for a long time. And well into the 1900s it sold. And it was about the 1930s, I think, is when it continued to sell to the 1930s. And it was a pretty cheap camera, but very reliable and very easy, simple, well, relatively simple during the times to use. So it was a pretty good camera. And then shortly after that, about 20 years later, we start seeing the introduction in 1905 of 38 millimeter film. So 38 millimeter film first comes out in 1905. And we really started seeing the introduction, but they were still big and bulky. So then we have to develop a nice compact camera that consumers can use. And so in 1913, that development of that camera started, but it was delayed because of World War I, and so we didn't see that camera get produced until 1925. And that's when that first 38 5mm camera came out, compact camera, and you might see it come through the slide here. And it started selling, and then shortly after that we have the Argus, who came out, and this is actually the Argus. I have one right here. This is probably a newer one, but the original Argus came out in 1939, and it was called the Argus C3, and it was one of those first compact camera, and you can also see one of the pictures coming through the slide as I talk. But it was one of the first compact cameras to come around. And, I don't really know how this works. I think you look through here, you take a picture. I can't take a picture now of the film. I don't want to take a picture of that's my friends. But yeah, so it's a pretty cool camera, So it's one of those first compact 35 millimeter film cameras. And then with the 35 millimeter being invented, the evolution of the camera kind of launched. You start seeing tons of varieties of cameras being invented. You start seeing, all around the world, they're creating camera technology. And we really started to see that development. And then in 1928, we see the first practical reflex camera, and those are those cameras with a mirror, and the mirror bounces off, and then it goes into the wherever it's going. And so we start seeing SLRs, and we start seeing TLRs, which are twin reflex cameras, and single reflex cameras, and those start selling really well. SLRs get really popular because of their small design. TLRs get used in pro-consumer and professional industries, and then that develops. In the 1930s, we really start seeing a lot of revolution being made in SLR cameras and a lot of development being made. And then in 1938, we start seeing the first automated cameras be invented. Now they're very, very primitive. They're really expensive, super expensive for the time, around $275 for the time, which is roughly equivalent to like $2,000 nowadays. And so they were pretty decently expensive, even though a nice camera nowadays still costs $2,000. But anyway, so yeah, it was called the Super Kodiak 620, and again, Kodiak is kind of pushing their limits here. But it wasn't perfect, and it wasn't until the 1960s when low-cost electronics came out that technology started to become perfected, and you could start seeing automated cameras. And Japan released their autofocus camera, one of the first autofocus cameras, which you see through the slide here. And that may have been slightly before Kodiak, but Kodiak kind of perfected it. Japan definitely was doing things, and that one that said first AF was actually a Japanese camera. And so, I'm getting these different sources from different parts of the website, and some websites say different things about historical facts, and other websites say different things. And so, but yeah, and then in 1948, we see Polaroid cameras come around. We see the first instant cameras that can take a picture and print it out right then. So here I have a Polaroid camera, and you can see it prints out. And these cameras, I'm not gonna take a picture at all, but these cameras, they're pretty cool, and they got really popular really fast. And the first model was what came around in 1948. It was called the Polaroid Model 95, and it became the world's first viable instant picture camera. And it kicked off and had a lot of popularity. But again, it wasn't till the 1960s till these cameras started becoming really practical, when low-cost electronics came out, and then so many different versions of these cameras started being produced by Polaroid, and their company really blasted off. So that works out pretty well. And then in the 1980s, we start seeing digital cameras come around, and cameras start looking a lot like they do today. And so the film starts to disappear. I mean, film's still being used today, and back then it was still widely used, even in the 1980s, because you barely start seeing the emergence of digital cameras. But that's the day where I start seeing a film start its slow death of dying out. And digital cameras became a lot more practical. You could get more in, and since then, since the 2000s, since the digital was perfected, we've just been seeing an increase in sensor size, an increase in digital technology, an increase in how much digital technology can handle, how much information it can handle. And we start seeing the invention of HD, the invention of 4K. We start seeing developments occur in image quality. Drastic developments occur in image quality. Now you can get cameras that shoot in 8K, 10K, Hollywood, way up there. And that brings us to our third slide here, the future of cameras. And so, me personally, I really think that the future of camera technology is in light field technology, in 360 and in VR. Now, first I want to talk about light field technology. Right now, you can actually buy light field cameras, even though they're not the best cameras. You can get a light field, you can get a really expensive, super expensive light field camera that's professional, that shoots really well. And then you can get cheaper versions for consumers that are like $300 and $60. But light field cameras, how they work is they almost capture a four-dimensional image. So instead of a traditional camera which captures as a 2D flat image of whatever it's going out with a little bit of perspective based off shadows and lighting, light field camera captures a four-dimensional environment of whatever it's shooting. So it captures what's called living pictures. So these pictures, the camera knows exactly what angle the light is coming at it from it. It can estimate the distance the light has traveled from an object, and all these other calculations it can gather from the light. So it gets a lot more information from every single light particle hitting it, and light ray hitting it, versus a regular camera, which is gathers the light and converts it into an image, and that's it. This camera starts gathering statistical information about the light, and where it's coming from and how far it's traveled, and all this information that's very useful to create a more dramatic image. And it basically blends the line between CG and computer graphics with reality, because it creates an image where you can go in, change your focus to whatever you want after you've taken the picture or after you've taken the video, and you can also manipulate that photo like it's a CG graphic. You can manipulate it like it's a computer graphic. You can manipulate it like it's an animated image on a computer. So it really brings up the photoshopping of the world up to the next level. You can really start to manipulate photos and video with a lot more ease, and you have a lot more information there to work with, like tons more information. So like another light field camera that's in concept still and hasn't been created is in that one in the corner over there. And that light field camera, that you can see that entire surface, and you can learn more about this camera in my 360 video episode I've done last week. So you can learn more about that from that last week's episode. But basically, the entire surface is a light field camera. And the entire surface collects light rays, and all this other mathematical information, and creates this fourth dimensional, which is just an expression. It's not, it's just an kind of gives you an idea of how it works. But it's the fourth dimensional image there. And again, you can learn more about light field cameras in last week's episode. I had a guest star who knew a lot more about it than I do, and he described kind of the mechanics going on there in more detail. And then also last week, my last week's topic was on 360 video and photography. So there's a lot of information on 360 video cameras and photography. So I'm not going to really go into that. But yeah, I think that's the future of cameras, is that 360 video and 360 cameras are really that future. And VR, creating stuff for virtual reality, is really getting big, and it's going to start booming here. We really finally have the high def technology that we need to create really solid VR. And again, you can learn more about VR from last week's episode. So check out last week's episode. It was a discussion on 360 video, and you should see it. You should find it in my YouTube profile, Qonda Entertainment's YouTube, and also it's on Qonda Entertainment's Facebook. Well, links to YouTube from Facebook. So please follow us on. Oh yeah, and I wanted to show you one more thing I forgot. Here's an old video camera. I didn't really get time to go into the history of video cameras, which have a slightly different history, but they're basically the same kind of thing. The difference is that photography shoots one picture, cameras shoot multiple pictures in a second. So, but there's still a lot more history there that I wasn't able to cover, and maybe I'll cover in like a future episode. But I just wanted to just have this episode be really quickly. I didn't want this episode to be long, about 30-minute episode, so just a quick episode, especially since I don't have a guest. I was trying to get a guest for this episode, but I wasn't able to. But yeah, so here's this really old VHS camera. It's really cool. And then we had, and I want to thank my friend Nate. He let me borrow these for this episode, and so these are his cameras. But again, here's that old Argus camera. I'll hold it up to the frame there for a little bit, and then here's the back here. So it's a really cool camera. And then here's the Polaroid camera, and so it's really cool. Yeah. So and then a modern camera, a modern DSLR 5D Mark III. And this case, you can buy it online, $10. A lot of people are interested in these cases. I'm not sure why more people don't have them. I mean, I got mine immediately when I bought this camera. I bought this case, and I kind of just looked up, cases for a Canon and there's tons out there, and they're like $10. You can buy them for any kind of Canon or Nikon or any kind of DSLR that you may have. They make these custom silicone cases for them, and they really help. It doesn't hurt to have one. You can also get protective covers for your screen and for your other screens that you have on there. So that's that, and so we'll go to our closing slide here. Move that out of the way. Okay, so the forecast. Okay, so QnA Tech School, again, we broadcast Thursdays and Fridays, 11 a.m. on Thursdays, Fridays at 3 p.m. And we have a big schedule coming up next Thursday where we're doing an overview on Adobe Creative Cloud. And the reason why I'm doing an overview on Adobe Creative Cloud is because it's awesome. It offers you lots of benefits, from web design to graphic design to video editing to photo editing, and also the Mesa Public Library, especially the one in Mesa Red Mountain Library, which offers this program for free. And I want to take a moment to thank them. I forgot to do that in the beginning, but I'm using their equipment to make this broadcast possible. This broadcast is brought to you by Qonda Entertainment, but I'm using the Thinkspot to make it possible. And so the Thinkspot's really awesome. They're in Mesa. They're at the Red Mountain Mesa Library, and they have the Adobe CC software for free. The other program is on Friday. I'm doing Introduction to Video Editing. So in there, I'll go over a bunch of different free editing softwares, the pros and cons of different editing softwares, and then I'll show you a little bit of Adobe Premiere Pro, and I'll show you a little bit of Final Cut Pro, which is Apple, and then we'll go over the free versions of those and kind of the benefits of buying your editing programs, your video editing programs, and what you can get away with on a free editing program, and what is good for you to have. And again, the library has Final Cut Pro and Adobe Premiere Pro here for free. The whole Adobe suite here for free on 2 computers, and one's currently out of order, but they're going to get that fixed soon, and that's pretty cool. Other Mesa libraries have it for free too, I heard. And then here you see the Business of Prison coming soon, so I'll just talk about that before I go into Qbert. But the Business of Prison, you'll see it in the background here. I'm not sure why it's full screen. It's not supposed to be. But yeah, so Business Prison is a really cool documentary series that will be coming out in I'm going to try to aim for the end of November. But it's going to be a very dramatic series on prison and kind of the corruption within prison and the difficulties that people get when they're coming out of prison, the difficulties that ex-cons have when they're trying to leave prison, because our society is not really accepting to people who have been through this prison experience, and then they're trying to make themselves better, and they're trying to improve themselves, and they can't because they're still stuck in the rut from having this stigma of being in prison. So our goal with this documentary is really to give people a different view, a different point of view on what prison should be and what prison is currently, and also to destroy the stereotype of a prisoner, to destroy the stereotype of an ex-felon and who that is, because there's lots of people who've just committed really small crimes and things that probably all of us have done, and they're in prison. Like a popular saying by a lot of professors are, "Why are you not in prison?" So there's a lot of people who are in prison who haven't done that, who haven't done really anything, or committed a very small crime, or got themselves stuck in a very bad situation that was just a mistake, and they're ready to redeem themselves from that mistake, or they were falsely accused, or whatever the reason. There's just a lot of problems with our prison system today that need to be corrected. And so I take interviews on ex-felons, and I'm going to have more interviews, and I'm going to try to release it by a web series. We're going to release, throughout December, we're going to release it as a web series, and we'll also have a premiere here at the Red Mountain Mesa Library, where we'll show it on the big screen here at the Red Mountain Mesa Library. So that should be really exciting. And then starting Tuesday, November 1st at 6 p.m., we'll have our first live talk show called the Qbert Talk Show, which will be on politics. And just yesterday, we went out to Michelle Obama's rally here in Phoenix. And we got interviews with people on the street that were there. We got interviews with Trump supporters. We got interviews with Hillary supporters, and we discussed stuff and caused a scene and talked to some teachers and really had a fun time. And so we're going to show clips from those interviews. We're going to show those packages, and we're going to put those in while our host, Herbert, played by our puppet, and whose operator is Xavier, and our co-host will be discussing politics and the election and Trump, and we'll really focus on the third parties. We're not going to necessarily support any candidate, but we'll mention the third party people and why they really aren't that much of a good choice. Why even if it was possible for a third party to win, there isn't really any good third party options available to us, and so we'll kind of approach it from that angle and really discuss it. So I'm really looking forward to it. We also have on the 4th, we have an End of the World series occurring. Was it the 4th or the 3rd? We'll see it here in a second. But I think it's the Thursday the 3rd. We have the End of the World. Yeah, it's Thursday the 3rd. We have an End of the World series coming up, and this will be really cool. So we'll have guys that are part of a ham radio club come in, and they're going to discuss how ham radios will work and how they're practical for the end of the world scenario, because they'll still function even if all our technology dies, even if our cell phones go out or other technology dies, ham radios will still be around. And then we also, on the 4th, we have 3D World, where I'm going to try to get a representative from who knows a lot about the 3D printers, and we're going to do an episode on the 3D printers and so forth, which are available here at the Red Mountain Thinkspot, 3D printers here at the Red Mountain Thinkspot. So that we'll discuss that and kind of the future of 3D printers and where they're going and other 3D things related to 3D. And then again, I'll be teaching Final Cut Pro on Wednesday evenings here at the Mesa Thinkspot Library, and that's actual Thinkspot class, and you can actually register for the Final Cut Pro series at thinkspot.org, so you can register on there. And then Thursdays I'll be teaching broadcast live only, not the class, but you're all welcome to come in person, maybe pop your head in. Broadcast only, I'll be having a series on Premiere Pro, Adobe Premiere Pro, and I recommend following either the Final Cut Pro series or the Adobe Premiere Pro series, because you might be confused if you start following both. And then and there's going to be a lot of exciting things coming up with Qonda in the future, and I hope that you continue following us, and please keep your eye out for QnA Tech School, for future QnA Tech School episodes. And thank you for watching. Yeah, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to mute now. Bye.